August 19th, 1942. Guadalcanal's jungle was alive with sound-chirping insects, rustling leaves, and somewhere in the distance, the faint crash of waves against the shore. Through this tangled chaos moved Second Lieutenant Genjiro Imi and nearly 1,000 soldiers of Colonel Kona Ichiki's detachment. They had landed just hours before, under cover of night, believing the Americans they were about to face were weak, untested, and ready to flee. The men trudged through choking humidity, their boots sinking into mud, sweat stinging their eyes, rifles slung over their shoulders. The canopy above was nearly solid, sunlight blocked by a green roof of palms and vines, making the jungle darker than midnight. Ichiki's orders were clear. Take Henderson Field quickly, strike fast, crush the Americans before they could organize. These are Americans, he had told his officers. They will break under our spirit. They will run. But the reality waiting for them was nothing they could have imagined. These soldiers, hardened by years of battle in China and Southeast Asia, were about to encounter a style of warfare that would overturn every assumption they held. The jungle itself became an enemy. Darkness, once their ally in stealth and surprise, now concealed ambushes, prepared killing zones, and a firepower the Japanese had never seen concentrated in a single line. 2 weeks earlier, on August 7th, 11,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division had landed at Lunga Point. Their mission? Seize the airfield near the coast and hold it until reinforcements arrived. What the Japanese didn't yet understand was that Henderson Field was more than a strip of grass. It was a lifeline. From its runway, American aircraft could dominate the surrounding sea, turning every Japanese ship in daylight into a potential target. The Marines endured an island of extremes. Mountains rose sharply into clouds, rivers teemed with parasites, and the air was so thick with humidity that men felt suffocated just moving. Mosquitoes descended in swarms, carrying malaria. Food was scarce at first, and disease ran rampant. Yet, when the first Japanese patrols stumbled into Marine positions near the coastal track, they were met with something entirely unexpected: disciplined, coordinated defenders, prepared and waiting. Captain Charles Brush led the American patrol that encountered Ichiki's men on the morning of August 19th. The firefight was brief but brutal. 31 Japanese soldiers fell, and crucial intelligence revealed the true scale of American strength. Japanese commanders had been deceived. Their enemy was not a soft, frightened force. They were capable, deadly, and fully prepared. Ichiki, convinced in his own audacity, ignored warnings. He believed Japanese soldiers' fighting spirit would carry them across the sandbars and into victory. That night, under a moonless sky, hundreds of Japanese soldiers charged across open ground, screaming war cries, rifles blazing, bayonets gleaming. They ran straight into interlocking fields of fire, Marines with machine guns, mortars, and artillery waiting patiently, annihilating wave after wave. The killing ground was methodically set. Browning machine guns ripped through the advancing lines, canister rounds tore men apart, and those who survived the initial storm faced relentless counterattacks. By dawn, more than 800 of Ichiki's men were dead. Those few who survived melted back into the jungle, a handful reporting the disaster to the 17th Army headquarters. The myth of Japanese invincibility had been shattered in a single night. It wasn't just the weapons, it was the coordination, the discipline, the patience. The Americans fought not with reckless courage alone, but with a system of destruction that left Japanese forces stunned. Supplies were abundant for the defenders' ammunition, medical aid, and reinforcements arrived reliably. The Japanese, in contrast, struggled with starvation, disease, and the impossible burden of carrying everything they needed on their backs. For the surviving soldiers, every day became a test of endurance. Malaria, dysentery, and jungle rot claimed far more lives than bullets. The relentless heat and humidity sapped strength. Their enemies waited, observing, and striking with precision. Every patrol, every reconnaissance, every misstep could be fatal. Guadalcanal was no longer just a battlefield, it was a crucible, reshaping the understanding of combat for an army that had once believed victory was guaranteed by honor and spirit alone. As the first American aircraft landed at Henderson Field, the island transformed into a fortress of air power. Guadalcanal was now an arena where Japanese tactics, honed over years of conquest, collided with a new reality: modern firepower, tactical patience, and the unforgiving embrace of the jungle itself. Fear began to creep into Japanese ranks, not of death alone, but of encountering an enemy who had learned to use every shadow, every tree, and every rising sun to their advantage. The stage was set. The battles ahead would be fought not only with courage, but against an environment that punished every mistake. Every night brought terror, every morning brought new revelations, and for Japanese soldiers who had never known defeat in such a manner, the terror was overwhelming. Guadalcanal had become a place where America's jungle warfare was no longer a rumor or a threat, it was a living nightmare. In the days that followed the Tenaru disaster, Japanese commanders scrambled to respond. The loss of Ichiki's regiment was more than a tactical setback, it was a psychological shock. Reports trickled back to the 17th Army headquarters of a force annihilated almost entirely in a single night. Survivors spoke of an enemy that did not panic, did not break, and seemed to anticipate every move. Guadalcanal had become a nightmare unlike any the Japanese army had faced before. Reinforcements began arriving, but the reality of the situation was stark. Heavy equipment, artillery, and supply lines could not move swiftly through the dense jungle. The Tokyo Express, fast destroyer runs under cover of night, delivered men but left almost all critical supplies behind. Soldiers carried only what they could pack on their backs: rifles, grenades, a few rations, and relied on foraging through a hostile, disease-ridden environment. Starvation became as deadly as bullets. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi, commanding the 35th Infantry Brigade, prepared for a major assault. He understood that Henderson Field was the key. Control of the airstrip meant control of the surrounding seas during daylight. Yet, the Americans had already fortified the island. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, commanding officer of the 1st Raider Battalion, had scouted Japanese movements and positioned roughly 840 Marines along a narrow coral ridge. Every machine gun, every mortar, every artillery position was meticulously sighted to create deadly interlocking fields of fire. September 12, 1942. Darkness fell, and the Japanese launched their attack from the south. Unlike Ichiki's rash frontal assault, this was calculated, attempting to infiltrate along ravines and wooded gullies. The jungle muffled movement, but Marines were ready. Patrols detected infiltration, and mortar teams waited silently, shells ready to explode at the first sign of breakthrough. The night was chaotic. Gunfire echoed through the ridges, screams pierced the humid air, and shadows moved like phantoms among the trees. Japanese soldiers advanced, waves after wave, attempting to overrun the positions. Machine guns tore into lines of infantry, mortars fell with devastating accuracy, and artillery fire shattered any concentrated groups. Small units reached Marine positions and were engaged in close combat, yet they could not break through. Sergeant John Basilone, already a hero at Bloody Ridge, moved tirelessly along the lines, repairing machine guns, distributing ammunition under enemy fire, and even leading counterattacks with a .45 pistol when positions were threatened. By dawn, the ridge still held. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers lay dead among the kunai grass, their courage and aggression overwhelmed by the methodical firepower of a prepared and disciplined force. The psychological effect was enormous. Time after time, Japanese troops had expected to face soft, untested soldiers, relying on night attacks and sheer bravery. Instead, they confronted a lethal combination of defensive preparation, firepower, and tactical patience. The battle continued the following night. Reinforcements arrived for the Marines, swelling their numbers to 2,500 men. Kawaguchi threw every available soldier into repeated assaults, attempting to breach the ridge before it became impregnable. Machine guns fired until barrels glowed red, mortars rained explosives down ravines, and artillery crews delivered danger-close missions that landed mere yards from Marine lines. The jungle erupted in fire, smoke, and chaos. Despite incredible bravery, Japanese attacks failed. Casualties mounted approximately 830 to 850 Japanese soldiers died in those 2 nights, while Marines suffered significant but sustainable losses. The ridge, later immortalized as Edson's Ridge or Bloody Ridge, became a symbol of how preparation, coordination, and firepower could turn the jungle itself into a weapon. For Japanese soldiers, the lesson was terrifyingly clear. Guadalcanal was no ordinary battlefield. Beyond the fighting, the environment took its toll. Malaria, dysentery, and tropical ulcers disabled troops by the thousands. Japanese forces, isolated and undersupplied, faced near-constant hunger, limited ammunition, and disease without medical support. The Americans, in contrast, were resupplied daily by Henderson Field. Food, ammunition, and medical aid ensured Marines could fight again the next day, while Japanese soldiers weakened in the jungle, their strength sapped before battle even began. In October, the Japanese launched their largest offensive yet. General Hyakutake personally oversaw the operation, bringing seasoned troops and coordinating attacks across multiple directions. Tanks, artillery, and infantry attempted to crush American lines. On the night of October 24th, 5,600 Japanese soldiers charged toward Henderson Field, facing elite Marines led by Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller. Waves of attackers were repelled with methodical precision. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery combined to destroy every concentrated assault. Sergeant John Basilone again distinguished himself, keeping gun sections firing under heavy fire, repairing weapons, and leading counterattacks when positions were overrun. By dawn, the offensive had failed. More than 2,000 Japanese soldiers were dead, including commanding officers. Marines suffered several hundred casualties, but the defensive positions held. Guadalcanal had proven once again that American forces, well supplied and tactically disciplined, could not only survive but dominate in the jungle. The battles demonstrated a new truth of the Pacific War. Courage alone was no match for preparation, firepower, and the ability to turn terrain into a weapon. For Japanese soldiers, every encounter with the Marines revealed a terrifying reality. They were facing a force that had learned to fight differently, to anticipate attacks, and to exploit the jungle in ways the Japanese had never imagined. Fear spread through survivors, not just of death, but of an enemy who seemed to turn every advantage against them. Guadalcanal was no longer a campaign, it was a crucible, testing the limits of human endurance, ingenuity, and resilience. As the campaign dragged into late October and November 1942, Guadalcanal became a living nightmare for Japanese forces. The dense jungle, the oppressive heat, and the swarming mosquitoes were no longer mere obstacles. They were silent killers. Every movement through the undergrowth risked exposure to hidden machine guns, artillery fire, or sudden counterattacks. Malaria, dysentery, and starvation reduced combat effectiveness to a fraction of original strength. For the Japanese, each day on the island was a battle just to survive. The Americans, entrenched and supplied by Henderson Field, could rotate units, rest, and replenish. Marines ate canned rations that, while monotonous, provided necessary calories. Ammunition and medical supplies were abundant. Field hospitals operated near the front lines with surgical capabilities, plasma for transfusions, and effective drugs to prevent infection. Every advantage of logistics and firepower amplified the lethality of defensive positions, making each Japanese attack more desperate and deadly. On November 12th, the naval battle for Guadalcanal began, a brutal four-day contest that would decide control of the surrounding seas. In nighttime chaos, American cruisers and destroyers engaged Japanese battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Gunfire lit the darkness with eerie flares, shells streaked across the water, and ships exploded in flames. Rear Admirals Daniel Callahan and Norman Scott were killed in the confusion, but despite losses, Henderson Field remained intact. Air support from the Marines could continue to strike Japanese ships during daylight, and the Americans retained the upper hand. Japanese attempts to retake the island continued with the same tragic pattern. Land assaults, though numerically larger, were poorly supplied and lacked heavy artillery. Soldiers carried what they could on their backs, exhausted and weakened by disease and hunger. Night attacks that had once promised surprise now led to slaughter. Every ridge, every clearing, every jungle trail had been turned into a killing zone by Marines who understood the terrain, who coordinated fire from mortars, machine guns, and artillery with deadly precision. The Japanese learned, painfully, that courage alone could not overcome planning, preparation, and technology. Colonel Ichiki's annihilation at the Tenaru had been a lesson. Kawaguchi's assaults on Edson's Ridge reinforced it. Each new attack ended in the same catastrophic pattern. Men dying in droves, leaders falling, positions held by fewer Marines than the attackers, yet defended with unstoppable efficiency. The jungle had become an American weapon, turning shadows into death traps and turning Japanese assumptions of superiority into illusions shattered by firepower and patience. By late November, the cumulative effect was devastating. Japanese diaries and post-war accounts speak of a profound fear. Men who had once considered themselves invincible, who had faced countless opponents across China and Southeast Asia, were now terrified of what lay ahead. The Americans were methodical, ruthless, and seemingly unending. Guadalcanal was not only a fight for territory, it was a psychological battlefield. Every night, every patrol, every failed attack eroded morale and shattered confidence. Survivors would carry memories of these horrors for the rest of their lives. Yet, amidst the horror, the human spirit endured on both sides. Marines adapted to the relentless jungle, learning to fight not only the enemy, but the environment itself. Soldiers treated each other's wounds under fire, carried ammunition across open ground, and held their lines against overwhelming odds. Sergeant John Basilone, Lieutenant Colonel Edson, and countless other men became legends, their courage and leadership inspiring those around them to endure the unimaginable. The battles of Guadalcanal would echo across the Pacific War. They revealed the terrifying reality of jungle warfare, that terrain, disease, firepower, and preparation could become as deadly as any enemy soldier. The Japanese learned to fear not only American weapons, but the methods, ingenuity, and resilience of their adversaries. The campaign exposed weaknesses in Japanese strategy, the dangers of overconfidence, and the deadly consequences of underestimating an opponent willing to exploit every advantage. Guadalcanal stands as a testament to the resilience of men, the horrors of war, and the power of preparation over sheer bravery. The island, its jungles soaked with blood, its ridges lined with graves, became a crucible that tested courage, endurance, and the ability to survive in one of the harshest battlefields of the Pacific. For American forces, it was the beginning of a campaign that would push them to adapt, innovate, and triumph against a determined and fearless enemy. For Japanese soldiers, it was a lesson in terror, loss, and the limits of human endurance under fire. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments.